Debugging Assignment 1. Debugging Assignment 1 asks us to do three different things. Rebase our existing repo, clone our repo, and then change and commit. So we're going to look at each of these different parts in turn and then discuss the various tools we use to do them. So let's talk a little bit about the terminology because I think that was tripping some people up. So when we rebase, we switch the base of a repo, that is some collection of code on GitHub, from pointing upstream to pointing downstream. So that kind of sounds like I just introduced a bunch more terms. So in other words, when the original collection of code has new changes we do not have, we request those changes, we pull those changes in, and then we merge those changes with our own. But we do that through the terminology of GitHub. So we rebase, we say, hey, my code is based on your code, so what new changes do you have? And then I tell you, hey, I have these new changes. And you're like, oh, thanks. And then I update my files to match the changes the other repo has. So we can do this a number of different ways. The easiest way is to actually go into GitHub itself and to say, hey, I want to create a pull request where I want my repo to match the repo I forked from, which is to say, I want to switch the base from my current one to another repo. So let's look at the example of that on Firefox. I think it'll make more sense for that. So let me switch over to Firefox. And you'll see here, I have my repo using my tutorial account. And it says this branch is 4 commits ahead, 1 commit behind Fidelis : master. So what this tells us is I have 4 commits, 4 collections of changes ahead of, and 1 collection of change, 1 commit behind the Fidelis master. So I know my code is forked from this other repo, which is to say it was created and then I created mine based on that one, right? I forked it, I created a copy of it. So GitHub is telling us that when it compares these two repos one to the other, I have 4 new sets of changes that collection doesn't have, and it has 1 collection of change I don't have. Well, I only really care about right now that the original repository has changes I don't have, right? I'm 1 commit behind. It has some changes I don't have. Now, when we talk about commits, right, we use the verbs pull and push. In this case, I want to pull in those new changes. That is, I want to pull a commit from the original repository. So on GitHub, anytime we're doing pulling, we want to create a pull request. So right here, it says this branch is 4 commits ahead, 1 commit behind, and then if I move my cursor over, it says pull request or compare. I'm going to click on pull request. So it's going to say, hey, if you want, you can take your changes and you can pass them to the original, right? Notice this little error. That's going to become incredibly important here in just a moment. It says, hey, from this position right here, my account, so I'm MD Tutorials, my account, I can, with this arrow, again, paying attention to the arrow, I can say, hey, I have some changes. I want to send my changes to the original repository. We do not want to do that. This is incredibly important here, and it's easy to get tripped up. It's something that happens to me all the time. So usually GitHub is set up in such a way that you fork a project and then you send your commits back to that project. That's not what we want to do in this case. In this case, all we want to do is get the latest changes and then we'll worry about our own code. So GitHub's not exactly prepared for that, and it gets a little bit confused, and it says, well, wait a minute. Don't you want to send changes back to the original repository? We don't. Do not do that. If you do that, I will close that pull request and not accept it. Instead, what we want to do is clicking either of these drop downs. We want to select, if you select the left one, MD Tutorial, or your account, and notice it lists every fork of this. So I'm going to click MD Tutorial, and then notice it collapsed them. So in case that happens, click on Compare Across Forks, this little link again, and it'll pop back up. Now what we want to do is we want your account, or in this case, my account, to appear on the left-hand side and the original account to appear on the right-hand side. The reason why we want to do that is because of this arrow right here. This points the direction of where the changes will flow, right? I talked about upstream and downstream. So I'm going to select Fidelis, which is the original, and notice it's pointing from Fidelis to my account MD tutorial. So right, the arrow, pay attention to the arrow. It's what direction changes are flowing in. This is where these terms upstream and downstream come from. So it's telling me that there's one commit, look, the little one popped up, 4 files, and it says, hey, this change was made on September 15th, 2020, and it tells me exactly what happened. 4 files, 63 editions across all of those files. So what I want to do, and I know this is a little confusing talking about a previous assignment, looking at a future assignment, but this is kind of the way we'll do this. So I want to, pull that commit in. I need to do that through creating a pull request. So again, paying attention that it goes Fidelis on the right-hand side, pointing to my repo on the left-hand side, right? And in case these collapse or it closes, you can always click on this link again and then make sure that's selected. So Fidelis on the right, mine on the left, right? The arrow is pointing to where the changes are flowing towards. Okay, so what I want to do is I want to pull in these new changes, right? I want to create a request to pull these changes. So I've got this all set up. I'm going to click on Create Pull Request. It's going to say, hey, what do you want to call this? I will accept week 4 assignment. That's totally fine. Create Pull Request. Give it just a moment. And then notice over here on my repo, which we're looking at, right? I have a new pull request. And it says, hey, do you want to merge this pull request? Now, pay attention to this. So if everything is totally fine, it's all in green. If it's ever a different color, something bad has probably happened, or GitHub might be a little confused. But if everything's totally green, we can merge these files. I'm going to go ahead and click on Merge. It's going to say, hey, do you want to give this a different name? I don't. Click on Confirm Merge. I'll give it just a moment. Okay. So notice this is now merged. So I'm going to go back over to code, right? Now notice this branch is now 5 commits ahead, but it is not any commits behind. This is important. It's fine to be ahead of another repo, but not necessarily behind, especially in this course as we're looking at these 2 different repos, one where I'm posting code and another where you're pulling that code in. So you don't necessarily want to be behind it all, but it's okay to be ahead. So I now have week 3 and week 4, which I just pulled in, right? Week 3 and week 4. So this is what it's talking about rebasing, right? On GitHub, we created a pull request. We messed with comparing forks if it didn't allow us to do it initially. We made sure Fidelis was on the right and our account was on the left. Then we created a pull request, confirmed that pull request, merge those files, and then confirm that merge. I know it's a lot of extra clicking and it seems like a lot of work to just sort of click multiple times, but each step along the way, it's helping you to confirm that's what you actually want to do, and it's actually giving you some space to put some comments in. So if we were working for a larger organization, something we could do is anytime it asked us for that extra confirmation, we could give some extra notes like, hey, I'm pulling this in for this reason, or I'm working on a separate thing. But because we're sort of working with a collection of code and you pulling it in, there's no real reason to do that. So remember then, creating a pull request, making sure, right, the flow of changes is in the correct position from the right to the left, which I know is a little bit weird. So creating the pull request, confirm the pull request, then merge the pull request, and then confirm the merge, right? And then we will then be at the same commit level, the number of commits, as the original repository. So again, it's fine to be ahead in commits. It is possibly bad to be behind in commits, especially for this course with these repos. Depending on other projects, they may not matter. But in this case, it's fine for us to be ahead. In fact, it's good that we're ahead because we're making changes to our own code. But in case a new debugging assignment comes out, we don't necessarily want to be behind. And so again, we use this rebasing. I know it's a little bit confusing, but it helps us walk through this. Okay. That was part one. All of this talking was part one. So we are now completely caught up with the Vanillas code. Okay, so my account now has the exact same code that was posted. So I am all caught up. Well, my code right now is only on GitHub, right? I need a local version to make any changes. I need to clone it, that is, make a local copy, right, in GitHub terminology. So there are two different approaches to this. I'm going to highly recommend, and I already know some students in this class are using a different approach, but I'm going to highly recommend you use GitHub Desktop. You can use other things, tools, if you're comfortable with them, but I'm going to highly recommend you use GitHub Desktop. And in fact, if you come and ask me for help, I'm going to tell you to use GitHub Desktop. The reason for this is because it helps, especially as you're learning these things, to have one tool for one task and a different tool for a different task, right? It helps you separate them in your mind. I'm doing this thing, and now I'm doing this thing, right? Different tools for different tasks. It is possible to use tools in different ways if you feel very comfortable with that. But I highly recommend, especially for first-time people, first time using GitHub, first time handling a lot of these tasks, it is extremely helpful for your own sort of mental stability to have tasks associated with tools, right? I use this tool for this task. I use this tool for this task. It makes learning, especially a lot of the vocabulary, significantly easier. So that's my major suggestion, is to use GitHub Desktop. So with that said, we now need to clone this code. So I am now going to act like I was doing this for Debugging Assignment 1, right? But I just pulled in the code for the next assignment, which I know is a little bit confusing, but that's the way I'm going to go about this. So, okay. So we'll rewind a little bit mentally. Okay. So we've rebased our code, right? We've got the code that exists on Vanillas. We're all ready to go. We need to make a local copy. So we do that through cloning, right? And again, highly recommend you use GitHub Desktop. So I'm going to go ahead and bring that up. So GitHub Desktop. So I've removed all of my local code so we can discuss this, and then we'll discuss what happens when you return to this in the future. So I'm going to act like this is my very first time. For most of you, this won't be, right? You will be returning to this after you've already cloned this code and then working with commits into the future, okay? So I'm going to act like this is the very first time so we can sort of talk through this process again. So rebased my code, right? Part 1, rebase. Part 2, clone. So I've got one repository, right, on my account. I don't have a local copy, and it says, hey, do you want to clone it? I totally do. I'm going to click on clone. It says, hey, where do you want to store this? I want to store this right here in Documents GitHub. I'm going to click on this, and it says, hey, okay, my username, Documents GitHub, you know, the name of this repository. You're welcome to change this to whatever you want, but it is useful for it to be in Documents GitHub. That's usually where it is on Windows, but you can, of course, change that. So let's clone this code, which will create a local copy. And fantastic, right? And it says, hey, how are you planning on using this? Will you be contributing to the parent project, or will you be using it for your own purposes? You will be using it for your own purposes. I think some people got confused at this step as well. So for your own purposes, do not contribute to the parent project. We're just using that so you can pull in code, right? For your own purposes. Click continue. Again, if you've already done this the first time, you won't see that prompt a second time. Okay, right? Tools for tasks. We use this to create a local copy. I'm now going to use a different tool, VS Code, Visual Studio Code, to edit the code. When I'm done editing code, we're going to return back to this program. Okay, but first let's talk a little bit more about the steps to debug and what we needed to think about for this assignment. So let's return to my presentation here. And the next step in the process would be to change and commit, right? We edit using Visual Studio Code, we open the directory and begin to explore the code. So before we jump into that, while development can often seem frustrating, and I understand, I'm a programmer, I understand development can be frustrating. The most common activity actually is not development, it's looking at someone else's code and asking a question we all wonder about. What the heck is this, right? So part of debugging is understanding other people's code, which I actually as a programmer, spend most of my time doing. Not writing my own code, but looking at other people's code and trying to figure out what in the world, how are they doing this? Or put a different way, right? What the heck is this, right? Okay, so let's pause right here. And again, tools for tasks, okay? We made a local copy of the code using GitHub Desktop. We now need to go open the code because we want to edit. If we're going to edit the code, we want Visual Studio Code. So I've already opened it, so let's move over to that. And I don't have a current folder or current directory open. So I want to open a directory, and in fact, I want to open the directory I just created during the cloning process that happened with GitHub Desktop, right? We made a local copy, it made it to a particular folder. I want to now open that folder. So if I'm using Windows, again, File, Open Folder. If you're using Mac, it would be File, Open. So File, Open Folder. On this PC, Documents, GitHub, again, just made this. So let's select this folder and then select folder down here and give it just a moment to open this for us. Okay, fantastic. So I currently have week 3 and week 4 because I just pulled in the week 4 code. So week 3, let's open this folder. I have article, component, index, package, right? What the heck is this, right? Question we ask ourselves pretty often. So let's move back to the presentation to sort of walk through different debugging steps. So, okay, what the heck is this, right? Question we ask all the time. So start from what you know. Start from what you know and then move into what you're not sure about or you may not know. So we are looking at node projects. That's the baseline, right? We're using Node, actually, right? Node.js, the very base is Node. So something we know then, and this will be true of every Node project, is that it will have a package.json file. So the code we were given has a package.json file. Start there, right? If you're ever unsure, if you're looking at someone else's Node project, and there are a whole bunch of them out there, start at package.json. Sometimes there'll be a lot of like weird options and stuff, but start there because it will always exist for Node projects. For Node project, it will have this file, right? So let's start there. The reason why we want to start there is this file has information about the project and its metadata, which is just a word of saying data about the data. So we want to look for two things, right? Say somebody just drops some code on us out of the blue and they're like, hey, can you figure this out? So we want to look for two properties. Remember, JavaScript object notation, JSON. So these are objects as notation for objects. We want to look for two properties. These are scripts and main. The reason why we want to look for these is because if a project has defined its own scripts, it will define basically how to do different things. And as we progress in this course, we'll talk about some examples of different scripts and especially scripts React uses. But we want to look for two things, right? Scripts is the first one. The second one is main. Well, so main tells Node what thing to run if this project is running, which is to say, it is the main entry point into the project. So we want to look for scripts and we want to look for main. So let's jump back over to Visual Studio Code. We want to look at package.json. We want to look for scripts and we want to look for main. Well, we can look for scripts right here, but if you've ever created a project in Node using npm init, you will know this is the default text. So that it doesn't actually tell us anything. Because notice it says no test specified. It says echo error exit 1. That doesn't really tell us anything. But right here does. It says main, and then the value is a string, which is a file, right? Index.js. So the main entry point into this project is this file, right? Index.js. Whatever that file is, that will be the main entry point. So start with scripts. And then scripts doesn't really tell you anything, but sometimes it will. But if it doesn't tell you anything, and again, we'll learn more as the course goes on. But scripts is not telling us a whole lot here. So, right, next thing in line, main. Main says index.js. So, start from what we know, right? package.json, look for scripts, look for main. If scripts doesn't help us, look for main. So if a project has a main, again, this will be the entry point. So in the case of this assignment, it was index.js. So what does that tell us? Let's open that file. So moving back to Visual Studio Code, right? And again, you'll get used to seeing these steps. So scripts didn't help us, but main did. Main says, okay, this will be the entry point. Again, look right. Say if I put my cursor over it, see the entry point to your program. So index.js. What does this tell us? Okay, well, it's got some interesting code here, right? First comment says import article, and then it's got something going on here. And then it says pass values to constructor, and it's got something going on here. And then it says show its HTML on the console, and something's going on here, right? Okay. So we know this is the main entry point to the program, right? To the project. So let's try something then. So I don't currently have a terminal open in Visual Studio Code. So in which case I can go to terminal, new terminal, give it just a moment. And I want to run this code. Well, so remember, because we're using Node, we can always run code using the Node command line tool. So N-O-D-E. Okay, I want to run this file. Well, notice something interesting, right? I am looking at this folder, fall 2020-mobile development, which shows over here. And I'm currently looking at index.js, which is currently in week 3, which is a different folder than I'm currently looking at. So wait a minute, I actually don't want to run Node first. I want to change my directory to a different directory. I want to change directory, CD, to week 3. From where I am to a different directory, week 3. And there we go. The current directory now is week 3. Now, your bash may look a little bit different than mine. I've configured mine in a special way to help me. Yours may look different, but it will almost always include the current directory. So notice this says week 3 is our current directory right here, and that's all I really care about at the moment. Okay. So I'm now looking at week 3 as the current directory. Fantastic. Let's now run this. N-O-D-E space index.js. What does this tell us? Well, it's going to attempt to run this file. Oh, and it gave us an error. So interesting. Okay. It says the error is an article on line 7. That's what the 7 means after this. And it says it's something to do with its constructor. And the error is reference error, must call superconstructor in derived class before assessing this or returning from derived constructor. Well, that is a bunch of gibberish, right? I don't really know what that means. We can assume. I actually know what it means, but let's just assume we don't know what it means. So let's stop right here. Go back to the presentation. So, okay. We looked in the main. We opened up index.js. We didn't see any obvious errors. Well, at least I didn't, right? We glanced at it and it's doing a bunch of stuff. I don't know. Let's try running it, right? So we ran it and it produced some errors. Okay. So if an error points at another file, then it's time to expand our search, right? We know the problem's probably not in index.js. I mean, it might be, but it probably isn't. So we're going to start with the original file, and then we want to see what it includes. So this is actually a pretty common term, although it goes by a lot of different concepts and different programming languages. So all programming languages have this idea, right? They have all of these different files, and then somehow all of these files get joined together when we run code. This idea of including other files. In JavaScript ES6, so again, in this course, we're paying attention to JavaScript ES6, that is JavaScript after 2015. So in that case, we can use the keywords import and export. So while it may look pretty odd, and I'm going to jump back to Visual Studio Code, while it may look odd, we can in fact use these keywords. And the reason why we can use them, and I'll pause here to sort of give some background about how this works, is because of this right here. Type is module. So notice right here, supported values are either CommonJS or module. Now, what in the world does this even mean? What is CommonJS and what is module? Well, Node or Node.js predates the shift over to JavaScript EX6, right? It's actually about 2019, 2010 is Node. So several years before. So at that point, in 2009, 2010-ish, there didn't really exist functionality within the language to include other files. And why would it? Because JavaScript at that time was primarily used within web browsers, and web browsers would use the script element to pull any files in, right? It handled it all itself. JavaScript would never do that, right? There'd be no reason to do that. So Node invented the require function, right? If I need to pull a file in, I can use require to do it. That got used for a number of years and became commonly called the CommonJS model, right? So if you see that CommonJS, it means basically the require function. Starting with JavaScript EX6, that is 2015 and newer, and starting in fact in the last few years, Node supports a different type called modules instead of CommonJS. All modules means is that we can use the keywords import and export instead of the require function and module.exports. So what I have done here then is I said, hey, I want to use this newer functionality, so I've made this type module, right? And in fact, I will go ahead and tell you I will be using this throughout the rest of this semester because it's a lot easier and it will especially help us as we move into React. So I have said type module, and I will be adding this to every debugging assignment we work on. This will show up again and again, or we will be using import and export. So I said, hey, I want to use import and export. I don't want to use require anymore. So if I have changed the type to module instead of CommonJS, I can no longer use the require function. In fact, it will produce an error because I've told Node I don't want to use that anymore. So all of that is to say, we were looking at this file and we said, okay, the error's probably not here, but what is it including, right? This idea of programming language including other files. So import article from, and this looks like another file to me, right? Article.js. So let's go look at article.js. Article.js, it says, okay, well, it's importing from component. Okay, so let's go look at component. Well, actually, component looks pretty simple, relatively, right? It's got a class, it's got a constructor, and it's doing something here, right? And it's doing something here, but it doesn't, I don't see any problems, right? Even if I don't necessarily recognize export default, which is using modules, so using EX6 keywords, even if that doesn't make sense to me, I don't really see any problems here, right? Okay, so let's move back to the presentation for a second. All right. So what file does our original import happen, right? Let's go through these files. We start there. We started with index.js, which moved us to article, which moved us to component. In each case, I didn't really see any obvious errors, right? So if not, we just move to what it imports, right? We keep moving deeper and deeper and deeper into a project until we get to sort of the bottom, right? Something is importing something, which is importing something else, which is importing something else, right? We just move through the project to try to figure out, wow, where are these errors happening? So, okay. The output of the console, right, the terminal, said that the error was on article.js, so it's not in component, right? The component looks okay. Man, it's probably an article. So it happened right here on line 7 is what it's telling us, right? Or happened around line 7. 7 says constructor, which is a special method, okay, and it accepts something called props. And then, I don't know, right? Okay, I'm not sure. Well, this comment right here, right, says send what it gets to its parent object. Huh. So I bet that comment is telling me what to do. if we want to send something to a parent object as part of a constructor, as inside a constructor, there's a special method for that. And in fact, there's only one method for this. It's called super. Super, right? And the comment above this says send what it gets to its parent object. Okay, super props, semicolon at the end, right? So it is a constructor for an object, and then it wants to send what it gets as an argument to its parent object. And we do that through this special method called super. Fantastic. So what happened, right? I started at index, I moved into article.js, I then looked through the code until I found a comment that didn't quite make sense right here. It also matched with this error that happened down here. It said, oh, must call super constructor, right? That was sort of a key to all this. So, okay, I want to save this file. Again, two different ways to do that in Visual Studio Code. You can go to File, Save, or like me, if you have memorized the keyboard shortcuts, Control S. So we've saved it. So, okay. We've investigated this code. I now want to test it, right? So, okay, test our changes. We've explored, we think we found the problem. We make a change and then we want to test the code. So let's see, right? Does the same error happen? So a lot of development at this point, and sometimes a lot of debugging happens right around this step, right? We've explored the code, we think we figured out what the problem is. We've tried to look at whatever gibberish the terminal told us, and we're like, okay, well, I think I got it, right? Let's test this out. Okay. Moving back to Visual Studio Code, moving back to the terminal, I'm going to run this again, right? Index.js. Press enter. Is it going to work? Let's find out. Oh, okay, right? It seemed to produce something. I got no errors this time, so that's pretty great. Okay, fantastic, right? That's good news for us. No errors. So it produced this interesting block of text here where it has this props title, this props author, this props text. That doesn't look right to me. So let's come back to article.js. And so we saw a comment that gave us some direction compared to the error. Let's look at the other comments in this file. Import components, that seems okay. Article is a child object of component. Well, okay, that explains that. Send when it gets to its parent. Okay, we looked at that. So let's look at these next two. These say return HTML with the title, author, and text of this article. Okay. And this is use template literals for the variables. Well, what in the world is a template literal? Well, I remember, I say as a student, that I have watched a video on template literals. And I know they're a special type of way of including variable values within strings. I also know that they use this special symbol right here called a backtick, usually found above the tab key on Western keyboards, right? So this little backtick tells me something interesting. It tells me that this uses a template literal, which is kind of a hard thing to say. I know with a template literal that I can use then the value of a variable within a string, so something that's quoted right here in backticks, and I do it through using some special syntax. And syntax is just a fancy word of saying some combination of symbols, right? Okay, I know then I can get the value of a variable by putting a $sign and then open and close curly brackets around some variable. And once I've done that, notice that the color changed. The color props now matches props, right? The colors now match. So let's do the same thing here. And I'll do it one more time. Okay, I'm going to save this file. Again, I have memorized keyboard shortcuts, so for me, Control S makes the most sense, but if you have not, or if it's easier, File Save also works. Fantastic. I have now changed this over to use template literals. I've changed this to send what it gets to its parent. Seems okay. Let's try this again, right? node index.js. Oh, it changed. This is the title, me is the author, text, this is an example article. Well, what in the world's happening here, right? We know we changed this, but where is it getting this stuff from? Let's go back to index. So it appears to be these values right here, right? So we're sending in these three things as property value, property value, property value, right? Title, this is the title. Author, this is the author. Text, this is the text, which we're sending to article. So let's go look at article. Well, wait a minute. We know when we are creating a new object, the new keyword calls the constructor of that object. So, okay, new keyword calls the article of constructor right here of article, okay. And it's sending whatever it's getting to super. Well, I know then, and in fact, this little tooltip has helped us to say, oh, actually it's sending it to the constructor of component. Let's go look at component then. So component says, okay, so for whatever you get, create a new property on this class, this right here, keyword this, called props. So this.props, and whatever you get, just assign it this thing. So whatever value you get becomes this.props. Okay? We know, based on object-oriented programming, on object-oriented design, that anytime we see the word extends right here in JavaScript EX6, that we extend some object. So think back then, and the metaphor I like to use is think about standing on a ladder, right? It's everything the ladder is plus us. We are extending from the ladder. And in fact, they actually call things extension ladders, right? They extend us. So we're extending from this ladder. So, okay, we get then, when we extend, when one class extends another, we get everything that class is. This is a class, a little keyword class. So then we get this props. So in which case, when we call super props, we are calling the constructor of component, which is creating for us this props, which means down here in render, which is a method, and so it helps us, again, let the tooltips help us. It is a method, article render, that returns a string, template literals are strings, composed of this.props.title, this.props.author, and this.props.text. Title, author, and text are all properties of the object we pass to article. So in other words, we passed it a bunch of values as an object, and then it's now showing us that as a string, right? So, okay, index is talking to article. Article is based on component. Finally, down here in line 14, show its HTML on the console. We're calling a.render. A is based on article. So call the method, and again, let the tooltips help you, calling the method article.render, which is giving us back a string. Everything seems to be working now. I guess it's done. Okay, well, I guess all my code's correct, or at least as correct as I think I can do it. Okay, so in which case, right, we're ready for part 3. Finally, change and commit, right? Coming all back to this idea. We edited the file in Visual Studio Code. Again, tools for tasks, especially when you're learning this, tools for tasks is a great approach to just help you focus, right? This tool for this tool for this. So in Visual Studio Code, we opened up the directory, we edited the code, we got stuff the way we want. Okay, now we want to create a commit, right? Tools for tasks. Now we're going to go back to GitHub Desktop. Different tool now. GitHub Desktop. We made a change. We made these changes in this file, and it shows us right here. Fantastic. Okay, we want to create a commit. Again, as a reminder for this terminology, this vocabulary for GitHub, a commit is a collection of changes. Well, we could call this anything we want, but we have to give it a summary, right? What did we just do? Well, notice it helpfully told us update article.js. That's as good as a summary as we need, right? So let's commit to master, which is to say, let's create a commit, create a collection of changes. I'm going to click commit right here. Okay. Notice the verbs just changed. So I created a commit. The verbs we use to deal with commit is push and pull. I want to, from my cloned version, right, my local copy, I want to push a commit from my local copy to GitHub. Notice push origin, right? Push from me to GitHub. So I'm going to click push origin. Give it just a moment. And it says, okay, last fetch just now. There are how many commits and everything's pushed. All right. So I want to verify my commits, my collections of changes is on GitHub. Go back to Firefox. And again, you can use any browser you want. I'm just demoing it with Firefox. So it doesn't automatically refresh. So let's refresh the page. Ooh, look, we are now 6 commits ahead. Fantastic. That's exactly where we want to be. We were 5, then we made a change, and now we're at 6. And again, it's totally cool if we're ahead, right? We want to actually be ahead of Fidelis. Notice we have the name of the change we just made, update article.js, and it happened 1 minute ago. Fantastic. Now, if I was a student in this course and everything was updated, I would then submit the URL for this repository right here, right? Or if I really wanted to, I could go into week 3 and submit that one as well, knowing that my instructor, i.e. me, would know what you meant. So, okay, at this point then, we're all done, right? We started with part 1, which was rebasing, right? We noticed that we were behind one collection of changes, one commit. We noticed we were behind a commit from Fidelis, which is basically the repository we're using for code examples or for code projects this semester, right? We noticed we were behind one commit. So we rebased, which we went in and made a pull request, which again, it's not going to show up now because now we are synchronized. But we created a new pull request. Then we made sure that Fidelis was on the right-hand side, paying attention to this little arrow right here, right? And we noticed, so we switched it to our name. It disappeared, clicked on compare again, then selected Fidelis, making sure it's on the right-hand. Notice it says, hey, you're totally up to date, right? But if we weren't, it would give us some code here. So Fidelis on the right, ours on the left, right? Pay attention to where this arrow is pointing. That is the flow of changes from one repository to another. If there were new commits on Fidelis, in this case, this repo over here, then we would create a pull request, then confirm it. Then it would move us over to our pull request. We would merge and then confirm it, and then we would have our latest updates. So if we were at that point, right, I would then be coming back to GitHub Desktop, and I would notice this would change right here, right? This would say, hey, now do you want to pull from origin instead of push to origin? Again, we talk about commits using the verbs push and pull. So if there was a commit on GitHub I did not have locally, the first thing I would do would be to pull that or fetch it, right? It calls fetch or pull, right? So I would pull those changes, it would update my local code, I would make whatever changes I would want, combine them all into a commit, and then push that commit to GitHub. So again, you're working with your repository, right? In my case, for this example, I'm working with MD tutorial. That's the only thing I care about, right? But if there is new code, if there's a new debugging assignment, I then want to rebase to pull that code from Fidelis. Otherwise, I don't care. What do I care about what the instructor is doing, right? I need to care about my own projects. So working with our own repository, right? And only rebasing if there is a new debugging assignment and we are told to do that. Otherwise, we just work with our own stuff, right? We work with our own code, we create commits, we push those commits. If there's new changes on GitHub we don't have locally, we then pull those commits. Again, thinking of commits and the verbs pulling and pushing, working with those. This was a long video, I understand, but this completely walks us through the 3 steps of rebasing, cloning, changing, and committing, which I know was a lot of stuff for this assignment, but helps us now to take this video and walk through everything. So I hope this was helpful, but if not, again, you're free to send me questions via email, and we'll continue to work through these as we work through more assignments this semester.